What happens when a first-class ticket isn't enough to prove you belong? The first thing you should know about Darius Whitmore is that he doesn't walk into rooms looking for validation. At 46, after building a billion-dollar logistics empire from scratch, he's learned that the stares, the second guesses, and the sideways glances never really stop. They just change form depending on where he is. And today, they're waiting for him at Gate A27 of Phoenix Sky Harbor International Airport. The boarding line is moving slowly, families juggling strollers, business travelers glued to their phones, retirees digging for boarding passes at the bottom of their purses. Darius stands calmly in his tailored navy blazer, leather briefcase in one hand, boarding pass in the other. He's not loud, he's not flashy, just a man on his way to close a deal that could change the way freight moves across the West Coast. First class to Dallas, now boarding, the gate agent announces. Darius steps forward with the others, scans his pass, and offers a polite smile. Nothing unusual yet. But the shift happens as soon as he enters the cabin. A flight attendant, a woman with neatly pinned hair and a forced smile, looks him up and down. Her eyes linger just a beat too long on his brown skin, his slightly worn carry-on. "Sir," she says firmly, "this section is for first-class passengers only." Darius blinks, then glances at the big number 2A glowing on his ticket. He doesn't raise his voice. He just replies evenly, "I am in first class. My seat's right there." The woman doesn't budge. Her smile hardens. "Sir, I think you're mistaken." Coach is down the aisle. The words sting, not because he hasn't heard them before, but because they always carry the same message. You don't belong here. He could argue. He could snap. But instead, he does what he's always done. He lets silence speak first. He holds her gaze, calm but steady, like someone who knows exactly where he belongs. Another passenger behind him clears his throat, impatient. A man in a gray business suit leans around Darius and points. "Actually, that's my seat," the man says, sliding into 2A before anyone can stop him. Darius turns back to the attendant. "That's my seat," he says, this time with a quiet steel in his voice. The attendant doesn't even check her list. "Sir, please don't make this difficult." The cabin feels smaller. The eyes of other passengers stick to him, waiting to see what he'll do. Darius breathes in slowly, choosing his words carefully, knowing this is just the beginning of something much bigger. But before the first-class curtain is even pulled shut, a storm is already brewing, one that will make every person on that plane remember his name. The air feels heavier than it should. It's not the recycled oxygen or the pressurized cabin. It's the tension, thick enough to cut. Darius stays rooted in the aisle, not blocking traffic but not giving up ground either. His voice is calm, but there's weight behind every syllable. "Ma'am," he says, holding up his boarding pass so close she can't pretend not to see it. 2A. That's what it says. That's where I'm sitting. The flight attendant doesn't take the pass. She folds her arms. "I understand what you're saying, but the gentleman is already seated. Why don't we find you a spot in coach so we can keep boarding on schedule?" Her tone isn't apologetic. It's dismissive, like she's doing him a favor. The man in the gray suit, early 50s, expensive watch, doesn't even look up from his phone. He just stretches out, fastens his belt, and claims the seat as if it's his birthright. Darius exhales through his nose, still measured. "You didn't check his ticket. You didn't ask him for proof. You just let him sit there because you assumed I was in the wrong place." A murmur rolls through the nearby rows. A young woman in 2C lowers her magazine and studies the scene. A father traveling with his teenage son whispers something that makes the boy frown. Eyes dart, but no one steps in. The attendant's smile slips, replaced with irritation. "Sir, you're holding up the line. Please move along." For a moment, Darius is tempted to sit anywhere just to avoid the spectacle, but then he sees the way the teenager is watching him. Eyes sharp, waiting to see if a grown man will swallow his dignity just to keep the peace. And in that instant, he knows he can't back down. He crouches slightly, leaning closer to the man in the gray suit. "Let me see your ticket." The man finally glances up, his expression bored. "Look, buddy, it's not that serious." "You'll get a seat. Don't ruin the flight for everybody, buddy." That word, that tone. Darius feels the heat creep up his neck, but he doesn't explode. Instead, he straightens, his voice low but firm. "You're in my seat. You know it. I know it. And she He nods at the attendant. Knows it. The attendant bristles. Sir, lower your voice. I haven't raised it, Darius replies. His restraint makes the words cut sharper than shouting ever could. The boarding line bottlenecks, passengers growing restless. The young woman in 2C finally speaks up. He showed you his ticket. That's his seat. Why aren't you checking? The father with the teenage son nods. She's right. Just look at the list. But the attendant doesn't budge. She sighs, scribbles something on her tablet and says, Security can handle this if necessary. The threat hangs in the air. A ripple of discomfort runs through the cabin. Darius feels it too, but he doesn't move. Instead, he pulls out his phone, scrolls briefly, and takes a photo of his boarding pass. His tone is steady. I'll wait. The attendant stares at him for a long beat, then gestures toward a jump seat in the galley. You can sit there until this is sorted out. Darius doesn't even glance at it. That's not what I paid for. The silence after that is deafening. Even the man in the gray suit shifts uneasily. He clears his throat. Fine. Maybe I'm in the wrong row. He stands reluctantly, muttering under his breath, Unbelievable. He slides into 3A instead, as if he's doing everyone a favor. The attendant, rather than apologizing, just waves a hand toward 2A. Take your seat, sir. We need to get moving. Darius sits, but the sting lingers. The young woman in 2C leans over, whispers, I saw the whole thing. That was wrong. Darius just nods, lips pressed tight. He's lived through enough of these moments to know this won't be the end of it. But as the cabin door clicks shut and the plane begins to taxi, Darius realizes he has something most people in this situation don't. A level of authority that could change the entire flight before it even leaves the ground. From the outside, the first-class cabin looks serene. Polished leather seats, soft overhead lighting, the faint rustle of newspapers. But beneath that surface, it's far from calm. Every passenger saw what just happened, and every passenger is deciding, in their own quiet way, what it means. The young woman in 2C, her name is Hannah Kepler, keeps glancing at Darius like she wants to say more. She fiddles with her water bottle cap, lips pressed together, debating whether to speak up again. She doesn't want to be that passenger, the one who makes a scene, but she also knows what she saw. Across the aisle, the father, Thomas Renner, leans toward his teenage son. You see that? He whispers. His son, Eli, nods slowly. That's what I was telling you about. Sometimes, people won't give you the respect you've earned. You have to decide how to handle it. Eli frowns. But he had the ticket. Why didn't she just check? Thomas sighs. Because sometimes people don't see what's right in front of them. They only see what they expect to see. Not everyone shares that perspective. 2 rows back, a middle-aged couple mutters to each other. The wife shakes her head. He should have just gone to his seat and coach. Why make it harder for everyone else? Her husband shrugs. Maybe he was in the wrong. We don't know the whole story. Their voices aren't loud, but Darius hears them, and he doesn't turn around, doesn't correct them, doesn't explain. He's learned there's little point in trying to convince people who have already decided not to see you. Meanwhile, Hannah finally leans across the armrest. Her voice is barely above a whisper. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. That shouldn't have happened to you. Darius gives a small nod. Appreciate that. But I'm used to it. Used to it? She echoes, disbelief on her face. He looks her in the eye. Happens more often than you think. There's no anger in his tone, just truth. The flight attendant, the same one who had dismissed him, walks by briskly with a tray of drinks, avoiding his gaze. Darius doesn't bother watching her. He simply leans back, loosens his tie, and opens his briefcase. If she won't acknowledge the mistake, he won't chase an apology. But Eli, the teenager, is still staring. Finally, he blurts out, That was messed up. His father hushes him, but Darius turns slightly and offers a faint smile. Thanks, kid. Not everyone would say it out loud. Eli shrugs, awkward but honest. My mom says if something's wrong, you speak up. That simple statement hangs heavier than the silence before it. It's raw. It's real. And for the first time since boarding, Darius feels a flicker of something besides frustration. Respect. Still, the tension doesn't vanish. It lingers in the cabin, invisible but undeniable. People avoid eye contact. sip their drinks, scroll through their phones, pretending they didn't just witness discrimination in plain sight. But as the seatbelt sign dings on and the engines begin their steady rumble down the taxiway, Darius knows the real test hasn't even started yet, because in exactly 12 minutes, everything about this flight is going to change. The plane inches along the taxiway, engines humming low, lights blinking against the darkening Arizona sky. Darius sits motionless in 2A, posture straight, hands resting lightly on his knees. To the casual observer, he looks calm, maybe even indifferent. But in Seoul, his mind is sharp, calculating. He doesn't slam the call button. He doesn't demand justice right there. He knows better. He knows the quickest way to lose control is to look like you've lost control. Instead, he leans back, exhales slowly, and lets the silence work for him. Hannah watches him, curious. "You're really not going to say anything else?" she asks softly. Darius shakes his head once. "I already said what needed to be said." Eli, still bold from before, leans over his armrest. "But they treated you wrong. Shouldn't you, I don't know, complain or something?" Darius tilts his head toward him. "And what do you think happens if I raise my voice right now? If I push too hard?" Eli hesitates. "They'll probably say you're causing trouble." "Exactly." Darius gives him a small, almost fatherly nod. Sometimes the strongest move you can make is not giving people what they expect. His words hang in the air, settling on Eli's shoulders heavier than any textbook lesson ever could. Across the aisle, Thomas watches quietly. He recognizes it, that quiet endurance, the ability to stand your ground without moving an inch. It reminds him of his own father. Darius shifts his attention back to the window. The runway lights stretch out in neat, endless rows, glowing faintly in the dusk. He remembers another time, years ago, when he was pulled aside at a security checkpoint while his colleagues, white, younger, less experienced, breezed through. They'd laughed about it afterward, called it just protocol, while he swallowed the humiliation. This moment feels the same, only magnified. But unlike then, he isn't powerless anymore. Hannah notices his faraway look. "You've been through this before, haven't you?" He doesn't sugarcoat it. "More times than I can count." She bites her lip, guilt written across her face, though she wasn't the one who wronged him. "That's not right." Darius finally turns, his voice low but firm. "Life doesn't hand out fairness. You either let it break you, or you learn how to use it." Before Hannah can respond, the intercom crackles. The captain's voice comes through, calm and routine. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've been cleared for takeoff. Flight attendants, please prepare the cabin." The same attendant from earlier walks past, checking seatbelts, her eyes sliding over Darius as though he's invisible. He doesn't flinch. He doesn't call her out. He simply lifts his phone, angles it toward the aisle, and types a short message with deliberate precision. Then he slides the phone back into his pocket, expression unreadable. Hannah notices. "What did you just do?" Darius doesn't answer immediately. He folds his arms, leans back, and closes his eyes like a man who has all the time in the world. When he finally speaks, his words are calm, almost casual. "Let's just say, things are about to get very inconvenient for the people running this flight." Eli's eyes widen. "What do you mean?" Darius opens his eyes, just enough to look at the boy. "You'll see." But as the plane picks up speed and passengers brace for takeoff, none of them realize that a single phone call, made in silence, has already set the stage for a landing they'll never forget. The wheels bump gently as the jet eases onto the main runway. The cabin grows still, that familiar hush right before takeoff, when every conversation fades and people tuck away their thoughts. For most passengers, it's a routine moment. For Darius Whitmore, it's the start of a countdown. He glances at his watch. 12 minutes. That's all it will take for the gears he just set in motion to grind their way back to this very cockpit. The phone call he made wasn't long, not dramatic. He didn't need it to be. Just a quick connection to his chief of staff, a man who knows his boss well enough not to ask unnecessary questions. The only words exchanged were simple. "There's a situation. Call the airline CEO. Make sure they know who's on this plane." That was it. Nothing more. But those words carried the weight of contracts, partnerships, and millions in annual revenue. Words that could shift careers or end them. The jet engines roar, pressing every passenger back into their seats. Hannah grips the armrest beside her. Eli watches Darius instead of the window, his curiosity sharper than his nerves. "What's going to happen?" Eli whispers. Darius keeps his eyes forward. "Depends on how fast people listen." The father, Thomas, raises a brow. "What do you mean by that?" Darius doesn't respond right away. He studies the overhead compartment, the seatbelt light, the uniformed attendant pacing the aisle with forced composure. Then he leans in slightly, his voice low but steady. "Let's just say the airline depends on me more than I depend on them." Thomas tilts his head, intrigued, but doesn't press. He can tell Darius is a man used to moving in silence. The nose of the plane lifts, the ground falls away, and Phoenix becomes a quilt of lights shrinking below. The climb is smooth, the kind of ascent most passengers barely notice. But Darius feels every second of it, measuring the minutes like a chess player counting moves. 2 rows back, the couple who had whispered about him earlier are now settling into their seats with champagne flutes, oblivious to the storm rolling quietly above their heads. The man in the gray suit, the one who stole Darius's seat, scrolls through his phone without a trace of shame, earbuds in, detached from the tension he caused. The flight attendant finally returns, her tone clipped as she asks Darius, "Can I get you something to drink, sir?" The "sir" is forced. He hears it. Everyone around hears it. Darius doesn't even look at her. "No, thank you." She moves on quickly, cheeks flushed, though she tries to act unbothered. Hannah watches the exchange with narrowed eyes. "Do you think she realizes what she did?" Hannah whispers. Darius shakes his head faintly. "People rarely do until the consequences catch up to them." Eli perks up. "And you're making sure they catch up?" This time, Darius does glance at the boy, a half-smile forming. Let's call it accountability. The intercom dings again. The captain's voice breaks through, smooth and professional. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be reaching cruising altitude shortly. Flight attendants, you may begin service." But even as he speaks, the captain's phone on the control panel vibrates. A message blinks across the small screen, urgent, carrying the authority of the airline's top executive. His co-pilot leans in, eyes widening. "Is that from headquarters?" The captain reads the message twice, his jaw tightening. He flicks a quick glance back toward the cabin door, then to the co-pilot. "Looks like we've got a situation." In first class, Darius opens his briefcase, slides out a file, and pretends to read. On the surface, he looks like any businessman killing time. Inside, he knows the wheels are turning. The plane may be in the air, but control has already shifted. But as the fasten seatbelt sign flicks off and passengers settle in for a routine flight, the crew has no idea that within minutes, their entire evening and their careers are about to be rewritten. The captain stares at the message glowing on the small cockpit screen. It's short, but the kind of short that carries authority. "Return to gate immediately. Do not delay. CEO order." The co-pilot frowns. "What does that even mean?" "We just left the ground." The captain rubs his temple. "It means somebody important is on this flight. Somebody we can't afford to ignore." Meanwhile, in the cabin, everything looks normal. Drinks are being poured, trays passed out. Hannah finally relaxes enough to sip her sparkling water. Eli leans back, though his eyes never leave Darius. The man in the gray suit scrolls through emails, smug as ever. The couple 2 rows back laugh at a private joke. Everyone assumes the night will pass uneventfully. Then a soft chime. The flight attendants pick up their intercom, listening. One of them, not the woman who argued with Darius, but her colleague, pauses mid-step, eyes wide. She whispers to another attendant who looks equally startled. Their heads bend together like students caught cheating on a test. The intercom clicks on. The captain's voice is steady, but to anyone paying close attention, there's a weight under it. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've been instructed to return to the gate at Sky Harbor. Please remain seated as we coordinate with ground control. Thank you for your cooperation." A wave of confusion sweeps the cabin. People shift, murmur, glance at one another. Hannah stiffens, eyebrows knitting together. "Wait, we're going back?" she says. Eli perks up instantly. "This is about you, isn't it?" he whispers to Darius, half excited, half nervous. Darius doesn't look up from his file. "Maybe." The man in the gray suit pulls out one earbud, annoyed. "What's going on? Mechanical issue?" Nobody answers him. The attendants move quickly now, securing carts, whispering into headsets. The woman from before, the one who had dismissed Darius, looks pale. She avoids his row entirely, ducking into the galley like a shadow. Hannah leans closer to Darius. "You did this, didn't you?" He closes the file, finally meeting her eyes. His voice is calm, almost casual. "Sometimes the only way to teach respect is to remind people what they stand to lose." She studies him, searching for bravado, but finds none. Just quiet certainty. Eli grins. "This is like a movie." His father puts a hand on his shoulder. "It's not a movie, Eli. This is real, and this is what power looks like when it's used the right way." The descent back toward Phoenix is quick, the city lights rushing closer. Passengers exchange anxious glances, trying to guess what could possibly demand such an immediate turnaround. A medical emergency? A security threat? Nobody suspects the truth, that the fate of the flight crew rests in the hands of the man sitting silently in 2A. When the wheels hit the runway, the cabin jolts, followed by a hush heavier than the landing itself. The plane taxis toward the gate, slower this time, as though dragging its feet towards something inevitable. Finally, the seatbelt sign dings. The attendant's voice comes over the intercom, strained. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated until further notice." Passengers groan, restless. The man in the gray suit mutters, "Ridiculous. Total waste of time." Then the door opens. Two airline executives step on board in tailored suits, their expressions tight. Behind them, an airport security officer. They don't look at anyone else. Their eyes go straight to the cockpit, then to the galley where the flight attendant stands frozen. One executive whispers something to her. Her face crumples. She tries to respond, but he holds up a hand, cutting her off. The other executive moves toward the cockpit. Within seconds, the pilot emerges, face grim, jaw set. The passengers are stunned. A man near the back blurts out, "Wait, are they firing the pilot?" No one answers. The tension is thick, every second stretching like an hour. In 2A, Darius remains composed, legs crossed, eyes steady. He doesn't gloat. He doesn't smirk. He simply watches, the way a man watches the inevitable. But as the executives exchange clipped words with the crew, one truth becomes clear to everyone on board. This flight is no longer about a destination. It's about accountability, and the reckoning has just begun. The cabin is silent except for the faint hiss of the air vents. Every passenger is leaning in now, straining to catch what's being said between the executives and the crew. The tension is so thick you could cut it with a butter knife. The first executive, a tall man with a clipped voice, gestures sharply toward the galley. "Step aside," he says to the attendant who had confronted Darius earlier. She opens her mouth to protest, but the words stumble out, half-formed. I was only trying to..." "Save it." The executive cuts her off, his tone leaving no room for argument. "You'll have an opportunity to explain yourself later. For now, collect your belongings." Gasps ripple through the cabin. Hannah covers her mouth. Eli's eyes grow wide, locked on the scene, like he's watching the climax of a story he never thought he'd see in real life. The attendant's face reddens. "You can't just..." The second executive, a woman with a stern expression, steps in. "We can, and we are. You've embarrassed this company and jeopardized a contract we cannot afford to lose." Her voice carries, and though she didn't intend it, the entire cabin hears every word. The flight attendant stares at Darius then, her lips trembling. For the first time, the dismissive confidence is gone, replaced by panic. But Darius doesn't flinch. He doesn't glare, doesn't sneer. He simply looks at her the way he did when he first held up his ticket. Calm, steady, unmovable. The pilot emerges next, his hat tucked under his arm, eyes shadowed. He meets the executives in the aisle, speaking low but urgent. "I've been flying for 20 years. You can't just ground me mid-shift." The first executive replies flatly, "We can when the order comes from the top. You've been briefed. This isn't negotiable." The pilot's face tightens, a storm of pride and disbelief. He glances toward first class, his gaze landing briefly on Darius. Realization flickers. For the first time, he seems to understand who he was really carrying on his plane. Murmurs sweep through the rows. A man near the back leans forward. "Wait, what's going on? Why are they pulling the pilot?" No one answers him directly, but everyone can feel the invisible thread tying this entire scene to the man in 2A. Eli finally whispers it, almost in awe. He did this. Hannah nods slowly, her eyes never leaving Darius. Yeah, he did. The pilot sets his jaw, mutters something under his breath, and brushes past the executives. The attendant follows, her eyes darting wildly as if searching for an escape that isn't there. Together, they disappear through the cabin door, leaving behind a silence so absolute it presses against every ear. The first executive adjusts his tie, steps forward, and addresses the passengers. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the airline, we apologize for this interruption. Your new flight crew will be here shortly, and we'll be on our way. Thank you for your patience. The words are polished, rehearsed, but no one misses the weight behind them. In 2A, Darius finally closes his briefcase. He doesn't need to say anything. The lesson has already been written across the faces of everyone in that cabin. Thomas leans toward his son, whispering, "Remember this moment." This is what it looks like when a man refuses to be disrespected. But as the cabin slowly exhales, relief mixing with shock, one truth lingers heavier than the rest. The fallout isn't over yet. And before this night ends, every passenger will walk away with a story they'll never forget. The cabin door shuts behind the pilot and the attendant. A hushed quiet settles over the rows, like the air after a thunderstorm. No one moves, no one speaks, above a whisper. For the first time since boarding, the first-class cabin feels small, intimate, like every passenger has just witnessed something they weren't supposed to see. Hannah leans across the aisle, her voice gentle. She looked like she wanted to say something to you before she left. Darius doesn't look up from the folder on his lap. She had plenty of chances. Words mean little without respect behind them. Eli blurts out, "But you got her fired. And the pilot, too. Don't you feel bad?" His father shoots him a look, but Darius doesn't bristle. Instead, he takes a long breath before answering. Actions have consequences. Sometimes they come slow, sometimes fast. Tonight, they came fast. Eli frowns. So, you didn't do it just to get even? Darius finally turns, his gaze steady. No. Retaliation is about proving a point. Accountability is about teaching one. The boy sits with that, his face thoughtful. Thomas pats his son's shoulder, as if to anchor the lesson in place. Around them, the other passengers process the scene in their own ways. The couple who had complained earlier sit stiffly, unable to meet Darius's eyes. The man in the gray suit slouches lower, suddenly less important than he looked an hour ago. And Hannah, watching it all, feels a quiet conviction settling inside her chest. Something she'll carry off this plane long after the flight ends. Minutes pass before the new crew arrives, fresh-faced, polite, all business. They move quickly, setting things in order, speaking to passengers with care. The difference in tone is impossible to miss. One of them stops at Darius's seat. "Mr. Whitmore, is there anything we can do to make you more comfortable?" Darius shakes his head. "No, just treat everyone here the way they deserve to be treated. That'll be enough." The attendant nods, a little awed, and continues down the aisle. Hannah whispers, "Do you always handle things like that?" Darius gives her a faint smile. "Not always. But you learn over time that respect can't be demanded. It has to be expected. And when it's denied, you don't shout. You remind people why you can't be ignored." The words land heavily. Hannah nods slowly, already replaying them in her mind. The plane eventually takes off again, smooth as if nothing had happened. But everyone in that cabin knows different. They know they've been part of a story they'll tell for years, about the quiet man in seat 2A who turned an act of casual dismissal into a lesson no one could forget. As the city lights fall away a second time, Darius leans back, closes his eyes, and finally allows himself a quiet moment of peace. Not triumph, not gloating, just peace. The kind that comes from knowing he didn't let disrespect define him. And maybe, just maybe, one young boy on this flight will remember that strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the silence that speaks loudest of all. And that's the story of Darius Whitmore, the CEO, who reminded everyone on that plane, and maybe even us listening now, that respect has no price tag, no ticket class, no exceptions. The lesson is simple. You never know who you're speaking to, so treat people right the first time. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, whether you're in seat 2A or 32B, dignity is something no one can take unless you let them.